I think when I first started participating in cannabis growing was with my mom, like when I was 10 years old, and I looked at it just the same way as I did a tomato, and I gave it just as much tender, loving care as I did all the plants on the farm. And so really it was from the age of 10, and was never shared with me that it was an illegal and a bad thing. It was just another plant. You know, my parents were commercial fishermen, they were commercial loggers. We had a small nursery, we grew our own vegetables. My stepdad was a hunter. So there was a bunch of other things that we did, along with cannabis cultivation to make a living here in the Humboldt County. One of the things that my mother taught me early on was that it's super important to touch every single plant, every single leaf, and give those plants their individual attention that they need. Yeah, I think a green thumb could really define anybody that has the ability to build a relationship with the plant and really understand what that plant needs. And that was one term that people in Humboldt County referred to my mom as having a green thumb. And because of the way they viewed my mother and because of the way they talked about her as one of the best growers in Humboldt County, in a weird way, that's how I wanted to be viewed. I wanted people to look up to me for the way I could be the plant whisperer or take care of plants and have them express themselves in their best possible form. A typical day of coming home from school at even the age of 10 was helping mom check the water tanks, help mom check the drippers if it's in the vegetable garden or if it was on the cannabis. And, you know, I sort of just in my own way started gravitating towards, well, I'll take care of the cannabis, you go check the garden. So the more that my mom started discovering that, wow, he's doing a good job, all the drippers were filled, and really proved myself as a person that was really almost ready to get a Green Thumb Award. It was, you know, took 3, 4, 5 years of me begging her to have my own plants, because in having your own plants, you can make decisions on how to take care of those plants, right? I can try to figure out my own ways of how that plant might express itself in its best possible form. So as my mom was doing those kind of things, I really yearned to be able to do that, but wasn't given that permission yet. By the time I was 15 years old, I had begged her enough times that she came up with a way that really justified it in her own mind as a Christian person. And she gave me my first 10 plants to take care of how I wanted, when I wanted, to do all the things necessary to make them thrive. By telling me that any money that I were to make with those plants, it couldn't be used for anything fun. Like it couldn't be used for a motorcycle or a truck or a trip with the boys. It was more so that this money would be used for a college education, or this money would be used to invest in my future some way. And so I remember at the end of that year of cultivating, when I was 15, I made like 11 or 12 pounds. And back then it was more like, you know, maybe $1,000 a pound. So it was like $12,000. She sold it for me. She gave me the money. And what we ended up doing with it, there was a bordering piece of property next to where my dad lived along the Eel River that I purchased 11 acres, or put a down payment on 11 acres along the Eel River. And they actually had to co-sign on that property deed with me because I was so young. And so that was my first experience with cannabis. And really from that point forward, was just really addicted and wanting to create my own, grow my own, and do it in the way I wanted to, because it came out really good. After the age of 18, I always lost 1 or 2 gardens to camp or MET or to one of these enforcement teams. But as long as you made 1 or 2 of the gardens, you still made enough money as an 18-year-old kid to be happy and to be able to do all the things that you wanted to do. And so getting busted or getting your plants taken was common to most of my friends. It happened every year. I mean, I don't even remember a year I didn't lose multiple gardens. Back then with enforcement, it was so bad. We were growing under trees, we were growing underneath bushes, we were growing in trees. We built platforms in trees and put 1 or 2 plants up on these platforms. So it was the ultimate cat and mouse game, and the consequences in our minds back then was if you got in trouble, if you got caught in the garden, it would just ultimately be probation. When my mom left to go fishing with my stepdad, her and I came up with this scheme together that how do we communicate with one another that if you get in trouble, like how am I gonna know? You can't, we can't talk about it on the phone because if I get in trouble, I don't want them to think that you're part of it. So there was a code word that we came up with that if I ever talk to you, and to call somebody that's 500 miles out to sea, you have to use a land ship two-way conversation through a marine operator, and it's a little bit more complicated than just dialing up on a phone. And she said, so let's have a code word. The code word is if you say everything's A-okay, I know something's wrong.
And you eventually were A-okay.
Eventually, there was a time in my life that I had to make that call, or my mom had called me and said, how's everything going? And prior to me even being able to speak, the silence almost told her the next words out of my mouth were, everything's A-okay. I woke up one morning about 6 o'clock hearing somebody drive up my driveway. And we all had an idea on what we believed getting in trouble would look like and how that would go down. And like I said, we thought we could get probation if we got in trouble, but we still wondered or imagined what that would be like if it happened and how it would happen and what it would feel like or what it would look like. When I walked out this sliding glass door, I walked out the door and I met a guy in camouflage with a 9mm pointed at my head. And there was 30 federal agents directly behind him coming up my driveway. And, he turned me around, he asked me to put my hands above my head. He didn't handcuff me, he frisked me to make sure I wasn't armed. And then the rest of the troops came up behind him and they brought me in the house. They sat us down on the couch and they said, you are free to leave. This is a search warrant. But if you leave, we don't want you coming back until we're completely done with our investigation. And so I stayed here because I had always seen so many different things on TV about them planting evidence. And I just wanted to be the eyes here while they were doing their serving their search warrant. They searched the place, and at the end of the day, they were leaving the property. They loaded up my four-wheeler, they loaded up a safe. They took a few things. They took a bunch of seeds out of my house, some notations for whatever reasons they wanted them, and they handed me a little yellow speeding ticket that looked exactly like a traffic ticket you would get on the highway. And they said, if we want to contact you, we'll let you know, but you should keep this. And so after they drove down the driveway and I was here by myself, I was just kind of like, wow, did that just happen? That was nothing like I thought it was going to feel like or be like. And so I ended up contacting the lawyer, and they said, well, we don't know anything now because this was a search warrant. If it was the feds, then they have up to 5 years to charge you. And I was like, well, I'm just growing weed. I should know sooner than later. And it really wasn't until about 1.5 years later that they showed back up with an arrest warrant. And that's when I knew I was getting arrested federally and that I was going to be arraigned in the San Francisco Federal Courthouse building and needed $275,000 to post bail. And so you're either staying in jail while you're going to court, which which makes it a lot harder being in San Francisco and having an attorney up here in Garberville versus your mom willing to put up her house and put up her boat and putting up everything she owned to get her son that she taught how to grow pot out of jail to hopefully be able to defend himself, to not have to go in and do time, because I had never had a speeding ticket or been in any kind of trouble to that point. And you know, it was really still even surprising to me that I was getting in trouble for growing the plant, and was in disbelief for quite a few years actually, until I got sentenced. This courthouse had like 100 people from Humboldt, so they brought in some extra air marshals, and after they gave us a chance to speak to the court a little bit, and we apologized to everybody and this and that, because at that point we knew this was a sentencing hearing, right? We were found guilty for growing the weed, which we knew was going to happen. The judge stood up, Felton Judge Henderson, and he said that he would like nothing more to give us less time, but because of the mandatory minimums and because he felt bound by the law, he was subjected to giving us the lower end of those guidelines, which was for a first-time nonviolent offender, 10 years to life in jail. And so we ended up getting 120 months, which was 10 years for a first-time nonviolent offender, both my co-defendant and I, my best friend and I. I heard my name come over the loudspeaker from the chaplain's office, and they said, Mr. Casali, could you please come to the chaplain's office? And that's something you really don't want to hear when you're in there. So when I get to the chaplain's office, you know, he informed me that, you know, something had happened to my mom. And, you know, of course I asked him, is she okay? And he tells me no, she had passed away. And that was the hardest time that I ever had to deal with in prison. And, you know, feeling lonely, not knowing how to have any kind of emotions about it, especially in front of all these big bad criminals. And really got a lot of support from inside the prison, and also got a tremendous amount of support, you know, weeks following that kind of news from this community. My mom, every time she would come to visit me when she was back from a fishing trip, would bring me up cans of tuna and leave them in the field for me, and I would go pick them up. So it was about a year to the day that I'd been in jail, and she had just gotten done with an albacore trip. And she was sitting in the port in San Diego, and she was in the ice chest on the boat. She was gathering up a bunch of tuna that she had canned for me, and she was putting it in a basket, and she had a heart attack inside the freezer and passed away. So she ended up not coming up to see me that weekend. Really, from that point forward, just decided that there's a way to find, with all of us, to find a positive in every negative, to try to see the light at the end of the tunnel, because at that point I still had 7 years left. And the reality of being away for 8 years, inside there, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but when we got back onto the outside, was a shock at best. Really, that the last day that instilled in me that this was the best decision I ever made in my life, not to cooperate. When I showed back up here on this farm, and there was 50 people from this community here to help me get my life back in order. But some of the short-term things that we need when you're getting out of jail is money, and Eric comes over with, I think there was about 20 grand in a paper bag, and you know, he just drops it on the table. He says, I don't want this back here, just if you need more, let me know. And so it was things like that that don't happen in everyday life, that I would never personally ask for, that happened, that just instilled once again that this is my family. When Humboldt County offered permits to grow, most of us had already given in to the fact that we weren't going to do it. We didn't trust the government, we didn't trust them, and didn't really truly believe them. And so it wasn't until like the last couple weeks of the permitting process, supposedly, that's what we were told. They flew a bunch of helicopters around, and I woke up one morning with a Black Hawk helicopter about 100 feet over my house. The whole house was rattling, the windows were rattling, and I walked outside and there was 4 guys with AR-15s looking right at me. And at that point, as much and as adamant as I was of not going through the permitting process, I had to really come to reason with either I'm not growing anymore ever again, which I love to do, or I was going to have to go through and trust them a little bit and go through the permitting process, because the last thing I was going to do is put my family through going to court and going to prison or being in any kind of trouble again. So I called my third-party compliance person and asked them to sign me up, and kind of started that process, which ended up taking me down a journey that ended me as the 4th existing farm in Humboldt County to be permitted. Had no idea on how to build a brand, and really went forward with just trying to be myself and not make the farm motivated about money, and make the farm motivated about, this is the first time in my life I've been sharing what I've been doing for the last 45 years. And I want to share it with people, and I want to heal them, and I want to make them feel amazing, and I want to educate them. You know, watching how Whitethorn Rose has really taken a life of its own, really found a newfound love in breeding different cultivars and creating magical strains that people really resonate with. And one of the newer projects now that that's really exciting is this company called Most Wanted. And Most Wanted really celebrates a lot of legacy farmers and a lot of their legacy strains, and working with really good friends of mine, Eric and Jill, to really highlight the communities around here, and not just limit it to California, but really share it with the world. And so just kind of at the beginning stages with that, but it's going to be something special. It's going to be something that people want, and it's something real and true, and it's a reflection of this community.